All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm with Madcap Software. Today's webinar is going to be a lot of fun. I am honored to introduce Leigh Hartzman, content strategist at Waze Google, who's going to share project management strategies and tips on how to write more and chase less. Many writers face the challenge of juggling multiple projects, tight deadlines, perhaps fewer resources, and the list of spinning plates can go on and on, as I'm sure you all know. So in this session, Leigh is going to touch on new ways to tackle these challenging responsibilities. So if you want to make your life a little easier, delight your internal and internal clients and customers and your manager, then you have come to the right place. So welcome, Leigh. I am so thrilled to have you join us today. I do want to remind everybody that we have two quick items of business that we like to cover before we jump right in. Reminder, this webinar will be recorded. So if you have to pop out early, not to worry, we'll send a link to this session and the assets used today afterward. We'll send you an email with a link. Also, I want to remind everybody there is a question panel in the GoToWebinar control panel that you all are seeing. Please use this as a place to ask questions as we go. We won't be stopping in the middle, and we do have a lot to cover today. We might not get to every single question at the end, but if we don't get to your question live, please don't worry. We'll follow up with a question answer document and get in touch with you after the webinar as well. So with that, I'm going to go. I know, Leigh, you have a lot to cover. And again, I'm so thrilled that you're joining us today. I'm honored that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that intro. That was great. So hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining me for this webinar. I'm going to start out by just telling you a little bit about me. My name is Leigh, and I'm a content strategist for Waze at Google, where I started out a few years ago as a technical writer in the operations organization of the company. I was responsible for planning, creating, and managing all of the documentation for the company's customer service operation. And that included writing help content for our end users, who sort of fall into a category of a few different audiences. The first is Waze, the navigation app you, I'm sure, all know, that helps you get where you want to go and get real-time traffic alerts as you drive. Another audience is people who use Waze Carpool, an app that lets you share rides with other people going your way. And a third audience is actually businesses, big and small, who advertise on Waze. We have a self-service and managed ad campaigns platform, and we manage separate knowledge bases for each of these different audiences. In addition, I was also responsible for writing internal knowledge for our large customer service operation, including standard operating procedures and workflows, user manuals for internal tools for agents, and scripted customer communications for their use. Just a side note, I don't write the documentation for Waze's engineering teams. That's done separately. So over the past few years, the operation scaled significantly, and now I actually lead a team of technical writers who create and maintain documentation for all the audiences I just mentioned. Also, in my past life, I was actually a copywriter. I worked both as an in-house and outsourced copywriter for some of the leading tech companies that have come out of Israel, including Payoneer in the fintech space, Playtika in the social gaming space, and JDate in the online dating space. Copywriting was my profession for about 18 years before I switched to technical writing, and I have to say I've never looked back. I'm so happy I made the switch into technical communication. And I'm a Canadian expat living in Israel and a proud mom of 3 boys. So that's me in a nutshell. So let's just start by going over what we're going to talk about today. The first thing we're going to talk about is challenges that I faced in my day-to-day work managing projects as a technical writer, which after speaking to other technical writers, I learned that they were common challenges that many of us face. Then we're going to go over 3 key ingredients to successful project management for technical writers. I discovered these after doing some trial and error with my own work processes. Then we're going to talk about getting your manager on board. When you want to make changes to your work process, some of the solutions that I'm going to talk about today involve collaborating differently with your colleagues, and you may have to do a bit of convincing to make a case for changing things up a bit. And lastly, we'll open up for questions and sharing. I say sharing because I'm sure that many of you are experienced technical writers and have methods of your own that work well, and I'd love to hear about them. Maybe they're similar to mine, maybe they're different, and it would be interesting just to share all around. All right, so let's get started. So you're all here today because you're a technical writer or a documentarian of some sort, of some form, and you know that there is way more to technical writing than just the actual writing. But for some reason, it seems like nobody else does. It's almost like a secret that we keep from everyone. You may even feel like the majority of the work you do is invisible, like interviewing SMEs and extracting the right information you need from them, especially if they're not documentation minded. Deconstructing abstractions you're given so that others can understand them, tracking down details about target audience, the target audience you're writing for, defining a list of documentation deliverables, mapping all impacted areas of your existing documentation, juggling timelines, and the list goes on. And it's not just the feeling that people don't understand how much effort goes into creating documentation that's the problem, because so much of what we do is invisible. We often are expected to deliver in unrealistic timelines. Many times we end up working late nights because of it. Sometimes we get blamed for delays when it's not really our fault. We're pressured to widen the scope of work and amend completed documents at the last minute. If you've also experienced this feeling that your work is sometimes invisible, I'd love to see in the comments with just a thumbs up or like mention which bullet here resonates with you the most. It can really be a bummer because not only do you feel like your coworkers don't understand what you actually do, they don't see the real value in what you're doing either, and nobody wants to feel that their organization undervalues their work. Something that I've learned from managing a team of technical writers is that developing relationships across your organization with product, engineering, customer support, QA, and training teams is really essential for technical writers. And once you get those relationships off the ground, you'll see that it's much easier to make a lot of that invisible work visible and protect your time and get more recognition for your efforts. I found that one of the best ways to nurture these relationships is to align expectations with teams you create documentation for way before you start working and maintain transparency about your progress as you go. We do this by treating our documentation assignments as projects. And there are 3 ingredients to our project management process that make the difference for us, and I'll be sharing them with you today. But before, I just want to go over exactly what is a project when it comes to technical writing. So the definition of a project, according to the Project Management Institute, defines a project as a specific set of operations designed to accomplish a singular goal. A project is temporary and must have a defined scope and resources. So in the case of technical writing, the singular goal or the project would be to create a documentation deliverable or deliverables, like a knowledge base article, a printed user manual, a training video, etc. And the 3 ingredients that I will share with you today formalize the specific set of operations we do as technical writers to create the deliverable and make them public knowledge for your team or entire company. They also make room in your schedule for you to invest the time that is needed to define the scope of work for your deliverables, meaning a full list of new deliverables you need to create, a list of existing documentation that's affected and will need updates, the number of SMEs and other people you'll need to interview, the documents, specs you need to receive before you start working, All your dependencies should be listed here. And let's not forget how you will measure the completion and success of your documentation. And lastly, they allow you to define the resources you need. In our case, as technical writers, I'm talking about the time you need to create deliverables and produce them in different formats and languages. Okay, so our 3 ingredients sit on top of the basic project management process for documentation creation. I'm sure these steps look very familiar to you. You probably do these things every day. The difference here is that by adding in these ingredients, you're sharing your progress as you go with people in your team and across your organization, and you're structuring each step in a way that makes it easy and logical for contributors to know how to collaborate and give you what you need in the right time frame. So the 3 ingredients that sit on top of your existing documentation creation process are visibility, accountability, and service levels. So I'm going to go over each one here and just explain what I mean by each of them. Service levels are predefined timeframes in which your project management steps should start and finish in. Using service levels will empower you to manage your own time. It gives you a way to defend your boundaries with stakeholders when you're willing to make changes to a scope of work and when you're not. It also helps you set expectations and gives requesters and stakeholders peace of mind, because if they know that they'll get a response from you within 2 days from opening a request, they know what to expect, which gives them the feeling that they can depend on you and trust you. Overall, it adds a level of professionalism to your process. And next is visibility. This is all about making the progress that you make on your documentation project public knowledge to everyone involved. All the effort you make from start to finish should be transparent to everyone, as well as when your progress is dependent on other stakeholders and contributors. This is so all the work you do is no longer kept a secret from the rest of your organization. You can do this by tracking your documentation requests in a task management tool. And I recommend using the one that is most common in your company, even if it's not the most convenient one for you, because you'll have an easier time getting people on board with it. And if there isn't one, you can adopt a free version of the popular ones out there. And if that's not an option, you can always do this in an Excel file or Google Sheets in the worst case scenario. In your task management tool, you will need 2 customized fields that you'll create specifically for your documentation tracking, the creation of the documentation, on top of all the basic stuff that are public for anyone to see. We call this field, for us, we call it stage, and you'll understand a little bit later in the presentation what you do with that field. And to also add a field called SLA, or service level. Well, you'll add the number of business days you commit to completing each individual step. And last is accountability. Accountability is about assigning ownership to key players in the project from the start that everyone agrees and signs off on. That means who is the official requester of the documentation, who are contributors, who are reviewers who approve drafts and publish dates. When you align expectations on who is responsible for what, you'll find that people are more willing to work with you, give you the information that you need to complete your deliverables, because they know from the beginning that they're expected to contribute, and that others know that they're expected to contribute. So there is this shared accountability that drives the collaboration. So let's go through the documentation creation stages and see where these ingredients fit in. So we'll start with the first step, which I like to call the intake step. And every piece of documentation starts with a need. Someone in the company needs documentation for a new feature, and they request it from you. You might have requests coming from many different teams, sometimes even from people you have never worked with before. So no matter which teams the requests come from, you want to make sure that they all arrive to you in a uniform format and through the same channel. So you standardize your intake process across your organization. Every requester should provide you with the same information each time. This will help you scope requests faster and prioritize requests, since you'll be able to compare them fairly. So depending on the project management tool that you use, you can set up the intake stage as an online form or questionnaire, or a templated issue or ticket with built-in questions. In the most basic form, you can email requesters a doc to fill in. But the most important thing here is that you manage this step through one channel for everyone. So someone sends you a documentation request through your channel, you receive it, and here you've already got your visibility, here where you have your stage field showing, and you've got it set here to opened, because that's all that's happened at this point. And you've got your accountability here too, because in your intake questionnaire, we'll cover things like the requester should include information about stakeholders, anyone in the company who will be affected by the documentation, and also who are the contributors, who will be the ones who will provide you with product or feature functionality, and also who will provide you with access to test the functionality, information about the documentation's end users, your audience. If you're documenting a process, who will provide you with the process requirements. It's important to make the distinction here between stakeholders and contributors, because the person filling out the intake is actually nominating contributors here to your project. So maybe it's them or maybe it's someone else, but it forces them to acknowledge already at this point that the documentation is dependent on some sort of contact or SMEs collaborating with you. And this really sets the tone for easier communication because accountability is already set here. They should also provide you with who are the reviewers, who will sign off on your drafts and who will approve them, and also the release timelines, of course. And you've also got a service level here built in, or what I like to do at this stage is to commit to a period of time during which my team will open the request and start reviewing it to make sure that we have everything we need from the intake questionnaire. Something like 2 to 3 business days, depending on how swamped you are. So your first response to request would be either 1, yep, I got everything, I can move to the next stage to planning, or 2, I don't have everything I need to send this request back to the requester, and I change the stage to need more info and wait for them to give me what I'm missing. Okay, so let's assume that we've gotten everything we need from our intake stage, and we can move to the next stage, which is planning. We know that this is where we do the heavy lifting as technical writers. You're going to scope the work that is needed, estimate the effort it will take, and figure out how to schedule it so you can meet the deadlines. So you have a service level here. It's one of the most crucial steps to use it because planning actually takes the longest. Publish the number of days you need for everyone to see so that it's on the table from the beginning. And once you start reviewing the docs you received from your requester in the intake, the PRD, specs, whatever it is, and identify if there's any further information you need from contributors listed in your intake, you make it transparent by changing the stage of the task to need more info and assign the task to the contributor who should provide you with the missing info. So that's your accountability coming into play. And since they already know that they'll be called in for this, better chance that they'll cooperate with you. You mark this stage as planning in your project management tool, and it stays in this stage until you have absolutely everything you need to start writing. That's the visibility working for you. And we can get pressure to sort of get started on writing before we've really scoped the work because of time constraints, but it's also because stakeholders simply don't always know how much work goes into the planning, so they don't realize just how much time is needed for it. You can also give the planning stage an extra added value for everyone by adding a deliverable to it called a documentation plan. Make it an official document that includes the info from your intake questionnaire and all the information you distilled into something that you can work with, a list of authoring deliverables you will create, and a service level that you'll commit to. Give it to your manager and the requester for sign-off, so it covers you if somewhere down the line, someone tries to change the scope of work that you're working on. This is good PR for you because it's something concrete and public for everyone to see just how much work, important work, you do before you even start writing the documentation. When you manage your documentation projects like this on a whole, it influences the way other teams view your work. They will think of you earlier in the stages of their project, and they will try to bring you in as a more central part of the planning, and you'll start having a wider impact on initiatives of the company, and they'll start recognizing your contributions more. And even more than that, if you want or need to bring another writer on board to the project, it'll be super easy to do that by just giving them the documentation plan to read and bring them up to speed just like that. So the best thing about these ingredients is that it makes the writing part so much easier because you ensure that you have everything you need before you start. So all the hard stuff now is behind you, and now you can just write and do what you love in a time frame that you're content with because you said it and shared it with all your stakeholders, and there's just less pressure. If you find yourself in a spot where you get stuck and you need clarification after you start writing, it's okay to reach out to an SME and ask them to provide you with what you need. Just change your stage again to need more info, and make sure to always assign the task over to the contributor so it's publicly known that you're waiting on information. If you get notified by a stakeholder that a change has happened to the product at this point and documentation needs to be adjusted because of it, then you can tell them that you can do that, but it means that your service level will freeze during the time you're making the adjustments as they weren't part of the scope of work, or you can see that you have to add more days to your service level. The point is to make everyone aware that this change has consequences on deadlines, not that you as a person need to suffer the consequences for it and end up working through the night in order to make the deadline. So your draft is ready. You submit it to whoever needs to review it, SMEs, legal, main stakeholders, and that's your accountability coming to play again. You change the stage in your project management tool to in review and assign it to the reviewer, and that's the visibility. If they request changes, always go back to your documentation plan to make sure that it's a change that fits within the scope and that it's not something extra that wasn't accounted for. So you've got your approvals and everything's great, and then you move to localization. But I won't go too much into detail here because translation processes vary. But I will just say that it's important to, again, be transparent and change the status in your tool to in translation or in localization, and be transparent about the SLA. That's your visibility and service level. And again, if you also have other parts, other stages in your process like printing or video editing, so you can also add those in there too. So everything's done, everything's ready to go, your translations are back, and it's time to publish. I've heard technical writers say that they don't get to set their own deadlines. They rather just kind of inherit those from developers. And that's why documentation teams are known for working late and at the last minute. And I say, no way. Our time is valuable too. And if you use this work process, you will have everything ready for launch by the due date and probably even with time to spare. Change the stage here to publish or even complete waiting for publish because you got everything done in advance, and all your ingredients here in your project management process did their job. My experience is that when teams that you provide documentation to see how structured and thought out your process is, they're more willing to cooperate with you in a positive way. You create a solid commitment and that relationship building starts to happen. With the accountability, contributors will feel more invested in the project and there'll be better collaboration. everyone knowing who is who and what is expected of them makes a huge difference. And when you communicate your service levels, people know when to expect things, and they realize why you need the amount of time you do to get the work done. Set boundaries for people, and they'll be more, they tend more to respect your time. And now you're leading the process. You're leading your domain. You're less reacting to a situation. Now you're being proactive, and you're creating your own stage to showcase the work you do. I recommend making your project management process public by publishing it on an internal website or knowledge base so people are informed about the way you work. You can even set meetings with the teams that you write documentation for the most, and introduce them to your process, walk them through it, educate them on how you work. And you'll find that if you do that, people will be much more willing to collaborate, understand what you do, and it will just be easier to get everyone on board. Sorry, I'm having a technical difficulty here. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about getting your manager on board, because this could be, you know, if you add these things to your process, this could significantly change the way you work now, and it might mean adjusting current processes, and your manager may not be enthusiastic about it at first. So if you want to implement these changes, you need to think about how it would benefit them. And this depends on the team you're part of and what are your high-level goals that your manager wants to achieve, how they are measured. So just to give you one example, it could be about transparency. So maybe you have a manager who doesn't know anything about documentation. I know this happens a lot to technical writers. They may not fully understand what you're doing, which makes it harder for them to represent what's going on in their team to their manager. So this process can help with that. So that would be a good way to sort of pitch the idea of making these changes. So that's those 3 ingredients that we add into our project management process. I would love to open now to questions and conversation, but before I do, I'm just going to hand it over to Jennifer to jump in here for a moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Leigh. That was really helpful. We've got some really fun comments too. I'll share just some annotations here quickly, but just want to let everybody know on the call before we get to some of these. Through December 17th, if you are not already using Flare and Central, there's a fantastic promotion going on. You can purchase Flare and Central for just $99 per month. So it's a great savings. Your purchase includes platinum level support, access to the customer success team for free onboarding, our free introductory training if you're new to Flare. Again, this will be a clickable slide, so you'll get information once we get this all uploaded, but I just want to remind everybody of that promotion. Please reach out to us if you have any questions, or reach out to the sales team, sales@madcapsoftware.com if you have any questions about this promotion and what you can take advantage of through the 17th of December. All right, so with that, I think, Leigh, you have sort of a get in touch slide you wanted to share as well. Just wanted to encourage everyone to, yeah, Leigh's information's up here. Again, this will be available. Please find her on LinkedIn or Medium if you haven't already. I know, Leigh, you'd love to connect with everybody there. You know, I just want to point out, you know, you asked in the beginning for some feedback about, you know, some of the challenges, and you would sort of wondered if anybody else, you got a lot of definite high, like hands in the air, like me too about all of this. So I definitely think the community here is feeling some of those bullet points that you had in the very beginning about kind of the challenge at hand. So that I thought that was really interesting. A lot of folks kind of felt that, so that was cool. One question came in, you kind of touched on at the end, but I'll just kind of repeat it, which is, you know, dealing with parties that aren't responsive, like that challenge. You know, some parties that I deal with aren't very responsive. They may not respond when we try tagging them in a doc like this, or maybe mapping out our Monday morning board. How do you tackle some of those cases, you know, internally in your team when you're trying to streamline and others maybe aren't as engaging as you'd like them to be?
Yeah, I know that's a huge problem. It's really a real pain point. A few things we do for this. One is one of the tips that I did mention, which is I think for us, what really makes a difference is to really stress the importance of the requester in the picture, and we actually call them the owner of the request, and that we kind of build this relationship with the owner, so that if we try to reach out to someone to get information and they're not responsive, that the owner is also there to help us, call in these people. So it's not just us chasing. We sort of have like this sort of like tag team. So we do that. And again, it's also really important to have these contributors listed at the beginning and make them understand, like before we start, you're listed as a contributor for this, for this project, and you're going to be expected to pitch in here, and everyone sees that. So everyone knows that you're part of this initiative, and it's sort of like this collective thing where other people also understand that this person, that everyone needs to do their part in this project. And I know it's not easy. There's a lot of educating that goes on with this. There's a lot of going to the teams, presenting your process, trying to educate people on understanding why their collaboration, why their input is so crucial for you and your job. So it does take time and it does work. But it's a lot about relationship building. It's a lot about just going out there and making people understand why it's critical, and also to try to think about, when you do tag a person, or you do reach out, feel that you need answers from a specific person in order to continue with your writing. Something else to think about is maybe who your contributors are. Sometimes I hear technical writers talk about how their SMEs, or the people that they need to get their answers from, are people like developers. And developers are sometimes the most problematic ones, because they're very busy and they don't really understand what their place is in the documentation. And also to think about the fact that they're one of the company's most expensive resources, and that maybe instead of going to the developer, maybe you need a different kind of contributor to help you. Maybe it's the product manager instead, because that's kind of built into their role as a product manager to share information. So there's also that to think about. Who are you reaching out to, and are they the best person to reach out to?
Right. That's very helpful. So here's an interesting one. And I asked that one because a few folks asked that question in a few different ways. So I was trying to kill a few birds with one stone there. So I hope that was helpful. For some of you asked sort of a similar version of that. I hope that was helpful. What about, when you encounter management? So the question specifically was, how do you respond to a manager? Have you ever been in this position where, how do you respond to a manager that tells you, well, just work around the engineers who are too busy? I don't know if you've been in that position.
Yeah, that's a fun reply. Well, well, again, like some of the things I already said, working around for me would be something like trying to think of someone else who can be a contributor for you. Trying to think of who you can ally with. Try to think about within the project or the documentation that you're creating. Try to think about who is this. Who is the documentation mean something to? Does it mean something to, who will benefit from it the most? Like, is it the customer support team? Is it the product manager? Who needs this documentation internally? Who cares about it? And I would start by going to that person. I would start going to them and to see what they can do to help you get the information that you need, because they care, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes technical writers, their managers just don't sometimes they just don't care in the way that the requester might, in the way that support team might. So I would try to find an ally who could help you in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you finding that this can scale depending on the project size? I mean, a question came in that was, I thought, interesting. The question was, do you follow the same process for large projects? I mean, maybe you're updating a
Hmm.
large manual. Does it change? Do you find that it can scale depending on the size of the content at all, or what do you think about that?
Yes, yes. I do, though, for larger projects, what I tend to do is have way more meetings, way more, sort of scope of work meetings at the beginning to align expectations with the requester and to sort of go a little bit deeper into the needs at the beginning, face to face. Definitely, definitely, got to do a lot of face to face for those bigger projects. And then when you kind of understand when I understand who the main players are there, I sort of try to build a mini task force sort of at the beginning, and call everyone into meetings at the beginning to align expectations. And then only when expectations are aligned, then we move to managing the project online in our task management tool. But when projects are large, and especially when there's a hard deadline, definitely some face-to-face meetings or Zoom or whatever we do these days. And then the process can work the same way in a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, some of these questions are sort of the same, so I'm kind of finding ones that we could kind of answer together here.
Okay.
So, one question, kind of comment came in. So this is so great for knowing the current status of requests. How do you deal with the writer's workload to know which SLA to give back to the requester? For example, to be able to say, and maybe this is just what you say, but the example was given, I can't do it this week, I'm too busy, will have to be next week. Like maybe the
Yeah.
person asking is asking more about like the brush off kind of thing, or how do you handle that?
Um, okay, so I can answer about how we measure workload and how we
Okay,
make sure that it's balanced.
perfect.
Okay, so we have a system that we use to measure workload. It's I mean, I won't go into the details of the calculation of it, but we have something called we use something called we use a point system. Okay, and what we do is that we equate each type of deliverable with a number of points. Not necessarily each deliverable, but each sort of type of work. So if it's creating a brand new piece of documentation, that's a certain amount of points. If it's just editing one paragraph in an existing piece of documentation, then that's fewer points. And we quantify everything with points, and then know how many points each writer can carry in a given week, for example. And then it's not like sticking your thumb in the air, to check which way the wind blows. We know exactly how much each writer can handle, and how many points they currently have in their week, and that's how we balance stuff. So answers like I can't do it. The writer can't do it this week. He's too busy. It doesn't really come out that way. We're very measured, so like we know, and then again, if that's the case, then you always should offer like a solution. Like you can provide an alternative. Like it can be done in 2 weeks from now. I see if I see that the points we don't have as many points scheduled for a few weeks out, then you can give an alternative service level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm looking at a couple. I think we have time for maybe one or two more, so keep them coming. I know some of
Okay.
these we might have to get back to you all individually. Oh, there was one really good one. Oh, I thought this was a really good question too. I thought I'd share for the community here. In a smaller organization without a documentation manager, I don't know if you've seen this before, Leigh, in your experience, but who usually manages documentation, or who should? This is a good question.
Mm.
I mean, it's a hard one to
Um,
answer because I guess every organization is so different.
yeah, and if it's a small organization, I think it really depends. I mean, I think that the technical writers can be part of so many different teams and for it to make sense. I think for the writers themselves, I think my personal opinion is that I think what's most beneficial for the writer is to be as close to the end users as possible.
Mm,
So if you can be part of a team where you get the most insights, where do you get the most insights from about your end users, your audiences, behaviors, what they have difficulties with, their pain points, then I think that that would be, you know, the best place for the technical writer. So I mean, I guess if you could choose, I would say like I mean I have experience being part of the customer support, customer service team, and I think that that's a really interesting place to be as a
mm,
technical writer, because you really have access you know, user feedback all the time. You know, you have access to all the information about, you know, cases and what users are escalating, you know, issues with and things like that. So I think that that would be like a leading way to like sort of.
hmm
So I would say, yeah, I would say more like in the service part of the business. But you know, there are technical writers who would say the exact opposite, that they would prefer to be closer to the product
mm,
and closer to the engineering, so they could better understand the, you know, the features and the functionality and the technology. So
yeah,
um, that's my opinion.
yeah. Question came in just going back to the point system that you mentioned that you were describing. I just want to just kind of build on that your answer a little bit. But the question was, how do you define how many points a writer has per week? What type of metrics do you use to define this?
How many points they have per week? So basically, it's just a matter of like, it's a lot of like, at the beginning when we started to do it, it was a lot of just like trial and error. We really didn't know. I started with just a low amount, and started to build on it. I was like, okay, he can do 40 points. Let's see, you know, if he can do 50 without having him work overtime. And we learned as we went. And that's how we did it. I mean, it wasn't something that I knew from the beginning. It was all an experiment, actually. Like, it was an experiment using this point system. And we played with it for a good few months until we got to a point where we figured out how to use it. But we just because it's also very individual, right? Because there are different kinds of writers with different kinds of abilities. People who write fast, people who write slow, juniors, seniors. So it's individual. So I recommend that if you were to ever try to use a point system like that, that I would just experiment with it. I would just start with a low amount and just keep seeing if you can raise it a little bit
Mm,
every, you know, and you'll see that some writers can do 60 points and some writers can do 40. It's also a really interesting way to understand people's abilities and productivity too. There's a lot of things you can measure with it,
right.
actually. Yeah.
Cool. So here's an interesting one that's come in as a very good question. We currently struggle with the fact that we are the writers, but we don't have the team to manage the style sheets, coding, like any kind of special background, custom stuff. Any suggestions or thoughts on how we could navigate this well, or how do you approach maybe other resources within your organization that do that well to get the help?
You mean like designing the documentation?
Well, it's hard to know. I'm guessing here, but I'm thinking that like, you know, the corp, you know, maybe designing the CSS or the styling, how everything is going
Mm.
to look, or maybe there's some custom coding or scripting that you need. Okay, thank you. Yes, so it sounds like yes. We're talking about, you know, the CSS, maybe any custom coding or scripting that we could use to augment our documentation. Maybe just that
Um,
challenge of, hey, you know, how do we play to our strengths in this organization in terms of what we can do as writers, and maybe what we need a little bit of help with from somebody who knows JavaScript or some sort of scripting language for us. I don't know if you.
Okay, yeah. So I think it goes back to, again, what I spoke about at the end of the presentation, which is, first I would think about, what would be your dream solution, and try to do some research and see what it is. Come to your manager with a proposal of what you would love to add on to your service offering. That, not only do you want to provide the company with documentation, but also with the ability to do X or Y, and come with a solution, and then try to think about how to convince your manager on what's in it for them. I mean, how they would benefit from expanding your skill set, or what you offer. Why should he care, and how will it make him or her look good? And then bring your manager on board. And if it means getting budget, or if it means reaching out to another team to get a resource, then your manager can do that for you. But you have to first come with a ready solution to them, and explain, what's in it for all of you, and have them back you up on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at our time here. I think this is a good, I just want to reiterate, just a fun comment. I think that everybody on the call is sort of feeling this, but the comment was, I'm one of 2 writers here at a company with over 500 instructional manuals to update, not including the ones we add to the list every week, and over 300 clients that like customizable manuals. And the other writer is retiring in less than a year, so this project management flow will save my life. Thank you. So yes,
oh, wow.
super helpful, Leigh. Yeah, so looks like we're all many of us here are in this boat. So this will be a helpful webinar, and to go back and research afterwards. So Leigh, I want to thank you for your time today. I think everybody really resonated with all these points that you talked about today. And I think everybody, you can agree, we all took away a little something here. So this has been very helpful. So yeah, we just want to thank everybody for attending. Thanks for being so engaged. To the audience, thank you, Leigh, for your time and putting this wonderful content together. We so appreciate it. Just everybody from the Madcap side, we wish everybody well. We hope you have a great rest of the week, and we hope to see you on another webinar shortly. So thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Leigh.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.